So I just want to share some of my thoughts on the rising tensions in Hither Green, which is the area of I think South London, where a burglar was killed a few days ago. Now, this issue has galvanized a lot of public attention. It's been the headlines on the Metro newspaper and in other publications because of the aftermath. There have been rising tensions between the community there and the traveller community, of whom this burglar, Vincent Nicol, was part. This is not the first time there have been tensions between the traveller community and, let's say, mainstream community, mainstream society. So the fiasco has kind of all went as follows. A few nights ago, Henry Vincent was caught burglaring, in an elderly pensioner's house, 78-year-old Richard Osborne Brooks. And he lives with his disabled wife. Now, think about it. You're almost 80 years old. You hear a noise in the middle of the night. You have a vulnerable wife. You're vulnerable yourself. No doubt you're frightened. You don't know if the intruders, because there was an accomplice, are armed or not. Well, one thing led to another, and the burglar ended up dead. Now, in this country, the law allows for homeowners to use proportionate self defense, and I believe that is justified because if someone enters your sanctuary, your place of safety, then as far as I'm concerned, they have crossed a boundary that should not be crossed. Nobody should be frightened in their own home. So now what has developed is a sort of a back and forth. It turns out that after, well, basically, Mr. Osborne Brooks was arrested and then released. I think that was the right procedure. There are some who say he shouldn't have been arrested at all. I don't agree with that. We are a country of law and order, and whilst I have huge sympathy for Mr. Brooks, um, a man was dead and an arrest had to be made. We are not an anarchy. You have to have law and order. So when someone is dead, an arrest had to be made. But the police were also right to release him because they understood the context of the situation. Now, I was prepared to be sympathetic to the burglar's family at first because often it's not the case that the entire family are criminals. Um, and in the end of the day, he's their relative, so of course they're going to be upset that he's dead. And I was prepared to be sympathetic to that. But subsequently, what has happened? These this elderly couple are now living in hiding because of death threats from associates of career criminal Henry Vincent. And let's be clear, this was a 37-year-old man, not some desperate, scared 16-year-old who was forced into it. This was a man who built his life on targeting vulnerable people. He was a bully and a criminal, and he deserves no sympathy. You know, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. This was a man who was selfish. Um, and what subsequently happened is his family have put up floral tributes. Now, they have put up floral tributes at the very place where he committed his crime. And I think it was his sister said, "Oh, they're making him out to be a monster. He wasn't a murderer or a rapist." My response to that, no, but he was a career criminal who burgled old people, so he was really not much better. And I think the family has lost wider support because they have utterly failed to understand or acknowledge what he was doing in the first place. They haven't offered any sort of, we are grieving for the loss of our brother, but we recognize he was doing this. They haven't even bothered to acknowledge it. And now they're playing the victims. So what happened was two anonymous men came at different times and took down the floral tributes. The floral tributes were then put up again. One man disguised himself because, understandably, he doesn't want retribution from the traveller community. Another man was a bit more vocal, an older guy with a beard. He said his father fought Monte Casino and he got into a speech to the press about people standing up for, against scum, as he put it, in this country. But I understand the sentiments. People are sick and tired of crime. Um, and I would suggest that those who are coming from a very left wing perspective, I've seen this, Um, if you cannot put yourself in Richard Osborne Brooks' shoes, and if you're really sympathizing for this guy, yes, he's dead, and I don't gloat about that. But in the end of the day, he was targeting vulnerable older people. And do you really think he was not going to use that screwdriver? What was it? What did he have it for? This is a guy who no doubt would have used violence if the opportunity presented. And my only conclusion from the fact he ended up dead is that he underestimated Mr. Osborne Brooks. I have no doubt this guy was acting out of love for his wife, out of concern for his wife. Um, and now what we have is a growing tension and a growing back and forth between the traveller community and this community just want to be left in peace. Some might say, like, look at the footage because there was press there of the floral tributes being taken down and trampled on. Well, apparently one of these guys donated it to a local cemetery, and they may say, "Oh, that's very." They might be tempted to think that was very tasteless. I would say putting the flowers in that place was tasteless in the first place. It was provocative. That's the very scene of the crime. Um, his burglary, I'm talking about. They say Osborne Brooks was a murderer. Well, yeah, he killed the burglar in self defense. That's the point that they're failing to recognize. And all I can say is, thank God there wasn't a racial dynamic to this, at least the more obvious racial dynamic. Imagine if the burglar had been black. Our racial tensions are not quite as bad as the States, but you can imagine Black Lives Matter would be all over it. In the end of the day, people have a right to sanctuary in their own homes. And that's something the traveller community will not recognize. And, I've always subscribed to the view you can't generalize. So, is every single traveller a criminal? No, probably not. But the fact of the matter is, there is a serious problem with crime in the traveller community. And it's plain dishonest to say otherwise. Let's just have truth and not political correctness. Because wherever there is a traveler community, there is crime. And the way these people respond to their problems is violence and force and intimidation and bullying. That's how they resolve all their disputes. It's one thing the men having bare knuckle boxing matches among themselves, and you see the comments, oh, they're good fighting men. There's nothing brave and noble about targeting vulnerable pensioners. So the traveller community loves to play the victim. Oh, we're discriminated against, we're a minority group. But just for once, they should reflect on themselves. And if they have a problem with people demonizing them, well, then they should condemn the crime within their community. They should be, you know, weeding out their criminals. The problem is, a lot of them are criminals. So people might be tempted to say, oh, they've been discriminated against for years, and people of left wing persuasion just don't get it. When a community is being terrorized by crime, anyone who's ever experienced that, I was driven by my home from crime when I was 16. I haven't forgotten that. I haven't forgotten the fear and mental anguish and stress that that causes. And it's an utter disgrace that this elderly couple are now living in fear from retribution. The man who took down the flowers, he's not a vigilante. In fact, he covered his identity because he doesn't want to be targeted. He took them down because he rightly saw that they were inappropriate. That's what people need to understand. So, as far as I'm concerned, the family haven't done themselves any favors. People would understand if they were grieving privately. I would say give them the body, let them grieve, let them bury their relative. That's it. For them to put flowers at the very place he was targeting people without, by the way, permission of the person who lives there, the fence of the neighbour. Um, it's provocative. That's all it is. And that's how these people operate. They're now sending death threats to Mr. Osborne Brooks' neighbours and to the couple themselves. That's disgraceful. In my opinion, the police should be stopping them from putting up floral tributes at that particular spot. And if they have a problem with that, they should self reflect. Stop playing the victim for once. Henry Vincent is dead at his own hands. If he didn't lead a life of crime, if he didn't prey on vulnerable people, he might be alive today. So just for once, reflect on yourselves. Hell, even making this video, I could be putting myself up as a target because that's how they operate. These people aren't interested in reason. All they know is violence and force and bullying. That's the only language these thugs understand. And that's what they are, thugs and bullies. And it looks like in this case we're talking about a criminal family based on the behaviour that they have shown since. It's not a case of we grieve for our loved one, but we recognise he was involved in crime. No, they haven't even bothered acknowledging that, at least not sufficiently. They haven't recognised that he was targeting vulnerable elder people, older people. So it's a damn disgrace that this situation unfolds, and the politically correct brigade need to understand the context here. They need to understand what's going on. They need to understand that people have had enough of crime. And the traveller community, if they don't want to be demonized, then they need to weed out the criminals in their midst. And they're not going to do that because they won't introspect. They won't look at themselves and say, we need to change.